So thank you so much for deciding to spend this evening with us. I'm going to introduce our guest that we're thrilled to have in a moment. As I said, quite a few of the team are here. Some of you may know what's going on with MP Watch, and some of you may be a little out of touch with it. So I'm just going to tell you that most recently we've been focusing on growing, and a lot of the energy of the central team's gone that way. In fact, this Christmas, we are hopeful and confident that we will have 50 groups that are either growing or established, and that's thrilling. By next spring and towards summer, we think we may get to 100. And at this rate, if the elections, when we think it will be, the organic growth should take us to around 150. It's possible, rather excitingly, that we might, well, we are hoping that in the best of all possible worlds, we would get to 650 by the election. But for that, we would need some scaling up and Good Fairy to give us some funding. And that isn't in the pipeline, but we're hopeful that something might happen. So let's cross our fingers. We also were quite conscious that with the election looming next year, that we do need to put some political plans and some coordination across the network into place. And we'll be working on that quite soon. And we'll be inviting some of you to participate at different stages and all of you to be involved and to feed back on that process. But that will be coming soon. So I'm thrilled to have Mike Berners-Lee here. Mike has been a friend of our project. He's a professor, a carbon expert, and the author of a couple of incredibly well-known books, How Bad Are Bananas and No Planet B. We're very grateful for his support. So welcome, Mike. Lovely to have you here.
Hi, thanks. Sorry, everybody. I'm on... I've got power back, but not the Wi-Fi, so I'm on 4G. Just let me know if it's not coming through properly, or just see how we go with this. Yeah.
Okay. So welcome. So Mike, many people on this call are going to be quite well informed, but what do you think? Can you give us a quick summary of what you think is going on in the world right now?
Yeah, okay, so just a really quick, very big picture take on where I think it's at. And I'm gonna try sharing screens, but if there's any problem with it at all, I won't do it. How is that now? Can you see a slide now?
It looks great.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. So, you know, the big picture is we talk about climate and everything, and climate is a hugely important thing, but it's the situation we're in is much, much bigger than that. And climate is just one symptom of it. And I think it's that we've arrived in this era, the Anthropocene, where we're suddenly such a powerful species and we haven't yet developed the wherewithal to carry ourselves with the kind of care and responsibility that requires. We're the biggest thing, suddenly we're the biggest thing influencing this planet. So my little sketch for it is, you know, we used to be this little species running around on a big robust playground, and everything about how we do politics and economics and how we run society and how we solve problems and all of that has been learned in this previous era when the world was so big and robust. Now it's not, and we need to make this rapid adaptation. And we've had some time in the Anthropocene, but been able to get away with living as if we weren't, broadly speaking, and now is the moment in which the rubber's really hitting the road. I think that's the big picture of where we're at. And so we've got all these kind of physical challenges that we're up against, climate and an energy transition. While we deal with that, we've got to deal with food, feed a rising population, whilst preserving our biodiversity, which is just as serious as climate, but we don't talk about it as much. And we've got plastics and other pollutants and all the rest of it. So it's a very multidisciplinary, multifaceted challenge. And how are we getting on? Well, you know, we've had 27 COPs. And while we've had those 27 COPs, here's the carbon curve, and you can't see any hint at all that humans have noticed climate change as a result of those COPs, or as anything else, or anything else. So I'm not saying this to be depressing, but we absolutely have to find a way of raising our game dramatically and creating and interrupting the dynamics of climate and other things at the global system level. So it's a huge systemic, multi-dimensional systemic change that we need. Why haven't we been making any progress? Well, I'm sure people on this call are very aware of all of this, but, a mixture of very cynical lobbying from fossil fuel industry and others, corruption, fake news, every shade of greenwashing, and one way and another, the result being that as a species, we've just got our head in the sand still, and we're still asleep on it. I don't need to talk about we're breaking these records, but if it's not just that we're breaking records, but we're breaking them by this massive amount. So if we don't have a sense of huge emergency, then we kind of then we should have. So that's what's going on, I think. But I think what's interesting is it's not just these physical challenges, because from a technical point of view, they're solvable. So that takes us to what would it take for us to be solving these technical solvable challenges. That takes me to, many of us, to questions of, our economics isn't right, the way we're doing politics isn't right, inequality is not right. There's all sorts of other things that we actually have to sort out if we're going to get on top of the kind of, just the physical symptoms. And for me, that takes you to the heart of it all, which is probably some values that we can't live without anymore. And that's going to be, for me, that's where MP Watch becomes so exciting, I think. How's that feel?
So, yes, I think that with the problems on this kind of scale, it can be quite tricky to work out where to put one's effort. So how are you making those decisions, and why have you chosen that MP Watch is part of that picture?
Okay, so I'm always looking at, here's this big global problem, and each one of us is only just 1/8 billionth of a speck of it all. And so what can we honestly do to make a difference? And for me, it's a question of constantly looking for, where is the point of maximum leverage? Where is the kind of point of intervention? And years and years working on climate specifically, and other environmental things as well. And actually, I'm getting, in a way, fed up with just chasing the symptoms directly, because actually there's stuff going on at the sort of at core of the problem, which is anywhere near it. And I think specifically, if I look at all the bad decisions that are being made on climate, whether it's decisions about coal mines or oil and gas, or watering down our targets, or are our targets good enough in the first place, or any of those decisions, they don't have poor judgment at the heart of them. They have dishonesty at the heart of them. All the arguments for and against the coal mine, when Michael Gove says he's looked at the evidence, that's not poor judgment about what evidence he selected. That's dishonestly choosing what he knows is the bogus evidence in favor of the robust evidence. When Robert Jenrick says, "Oh, I won't call this in, it's just a local decision," that's not poor judgment. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows it's millions of tons on a global that the whole world's looking at. So, just examples of it's a culture of dishonesty that we just have to sort out. Almost whatever it is you care about, you can't make the incredibly high quality, complex decision making that we need to do if we're going to find our way through climate or any of the other dimensions of this, what I'd call the Anthropocene challenge. So that's why focus on that's why MP Watch is so exciting, because you know, we can change the dial on what we're getting from our MPs. And it's been, you know, it's been really desperate for the last few years. But the good news is that it actually is something that we could do something about if we get this just right.
So Mike, some people that I speak to, when I tell them about the project, they say, but politics has always been a problem. Politics, the word itself has a kind of dishonesty, manipulative sort of idea around it. So why that, and they imply that we're naive to try and tackle it at this time, particularly when the national political life is degraded to an extent that people haven't seen in their lifetimes, even fairly people getting on a bit like me. So why are you hopeful that this approach will work?
Well, yeah, the fact that things have got worse recently, in a way, it's a cause for optimism because it shows it's a variable, right? If it can move the wrong direction, it must be possible to move it in the right direction. And I think, it's the most dishonest politicians that are most enthusiastic about the line that says, "Oh well, there's always been lying in politics. That's just the way it works. Everybody lies, don't they?" And they love that narrative because it lets them get away with anything, and it levels the playing field, and it justifies the way they behave. And I think to some extent, there has always been some lying in politics. That's right. But the amount of it is a variable. And I think what I would say is whether or not there's always been some lying in politics, if you look at the nature of the Anthropocene challenge, it's so complex. It requires such high quality joined up thinking. And it requires the best view of reality as we can perceive it that we can possibly get. And there's no room for any form of misinformation or concealing what that reality is as best we can attain it. And yet the ease with which that can be misinformation can be spread is greater than ever before, partly because of social media, partly because of AI, and partly because the complexity of the issues means that you can dress almost anything you like up to look good at face value. So that's why we need to be hotter than ever on our standards of honesty. Yes. And one analogy might be, a courtroom. So, in a trial, we know that you can't get anywhere unless you have a really high standard, unless you have a really high standard of honesty. And so you put in place a very high price for perjury because you can't get anywhere unless people are taking the truth seriously. And it's the same in our politics now.
I love that. I love that analogy. How ambitious do you think we can be?
Well, we've either got to say to ourselves, look, we're happy with the idea that our view of all our lives is going to be that we're going to spend from now until we die batting away about this stuff and getting frustrated that nobody takes any notice while the world goes down the tubes. Or we can say, actually, whatever the odds are, I don't know, but it is possible. It's certainly not proven that we can't get out of this. In which case, we have to pursue the best chance we think we can have of creating the conditions under which the world can properly wake up and properly start taking the kind of action that is needed, which we're miles away from so far. So for me, what excites me about MP Watch is that I actually think there is a believable theory of change here, where we might not on our own change the whole world, but the theory of change is that between us we can actually raise the bar on UK politics, raise the standard of of honesty and integrity of MP that we get. and raise the standard to which, and bring out the best in them when they're in Parliament. And in doing so, we can radically change the quality of the discussion that goes on, the quality of the decision making to deal with these problems. And if we succeed in doing that, we can even produce a template from which other countries can learn. So for me, there's a multiplier effect potentially if we get this just right that goes beyond the UK. And I'm not at all saying that it's going to be easy to attain the level of global cooperation that the world has never seen before, and yet I think is required in order to deal with the challenges that we've got.
Yes,
But I think this is, this is the pathway.
I was
Sorry.
to kind of continue that thought with another rebuttal, which is the "what about China" kind of argument, which so we are a very rich economy, and we have a bit of a track record with fossil fuels, which means that we've very much punched above our weight. But at this moment, there's trouble in Gaza. There is a Russia-Ukraine war. It doesn't seem like as with lots of dictatorships, and it doesn't seem like international cooperation is very easy. So how can we have an impact by working right here, right now?
Yeah. Okay. So I think if you look at those conflicts, I mean, they require some dishonesty to get going. Putin wouldn't be able to wage his war in the Ukraine if he couldn't get away with rampant dishonesty. So I'm absolutely not saying that it's easy, but if we can put in place honest politicians who aren't able to say things that are bullshit, without knowing that their careers will be on the line, then we can put in place, a far better platform for being able to work out what would be, our small way of intervening constructively in Ukraine and Israel and Palestine and all of that. So I think what's interesting about this honesty thing is that it doesn't matter what you care about most, whether it's climate or world peace or biodiversity or energy prices or inequality or social justice or some cultural thing or whatever. Actually, you've got to have a platform of basic honesty and integrity in order to be able to have a sensible discussion. You need people free to make decisions in the national interest, unwarped by corrosive interests, funding from nasty places, hidden associations that are driving their motivation, in all sorts of ways that aren't clear to the public, or just playing fast and loose with the truth. So it's interesting. I was out in Iceland early this year and talking to the government out there, and there was something just incredibly refreshing about the nature of the conversation, because the whole thing felt less corrupt. It felt as though the ability to actually just sit down and talk properly and honestly about a problem was just dramatically better.
Yeah. And I'll just, before I ask you another question, I'll just mention the fact that you were talking about right at the beginning about ChatGPT and how that is aiding misinformation. Well, we're lucky enough, unfortunately, he's not on the call, but we have a great tech recruit who is working with ChatGPT and other codes to look at MPs' donations and to find the patterns in there. So we're hoping to be able to have part of our website where you can put the name of your MP in, and you can see how much they get from their MP job, how much they get from other funds, and who exactly has been funding them. So in that way, it's rather excitingly, we can use those instruments to stop people hiding in plain sight, because up until now it's been possible to hide in that complexity. It's buried in spreadsheets across the net. So that's a rather wonderful aspect to what we're doing. So Mike, for MP Watch to be everything that you're imagining it might be, what do you think we need to do?
Okay, so the first part of my answer to that question, I think, is this focus on honesty even more than climate. And just to talk that through a little bit, it's because why I think that's more powerful is because you can't get anywhere on climate without getting somewhere on honesty. And it's because if you can get somewhere on honesty, it helps you get somewhere on everything else that matters, because this whole agenda, you can't solve climate on its own. You can't solve climate without dealing with social issues and just a rack of other stuff. And so climate is the great enabler of all of that. And there's another reason for it as well, which is that most people who are getting really frustrated at the way their world is falling apart because of all sorts of the result of all sorts of fundamentally dishonest decision making, are getting really frustrated and fed up with having been taken for a ride. And actually, I think there's an enormous amount of energy in that. People who realize that, whether or not you think Brexit's a good idea, it was missold through dishonesty. And there's, and the sort of, the routine dishonesty that people are hearing from our politicians at the moment. I think a lot of people who don't care about climate that much at the moment do care about that stuff and can get behind the idea of how important it is to raise the bar on honesty in our MPs. And actually, that's the route by which we might engage a lot of those people on climate as well. Because once they catch on to how important honesty is and they start looking at what the real story is, then it's crumbs. And there's climate as well, and nobody's been telling us about that. So actually, it's the route to... so it's absolutely not because climate doesn't matter as much as honesty. That's not the point at all. The point is that it's because climate matters so much, and we want to do better than just chasing the symptoms. We're going to get to the core issue that will actually allow us to unlock climate and all these other things as well. And then what will it take how can an MP Watch operate in order to really to realize that vision in which we actually succeed in changing the way a significant proportion of the electorate think about who they're going to vote for, and in that way eliminate a lot of the very worst politicians, reward a lot of the very best potential politicians, bring out the best in whoever gets in anyway, and radically change the bar on just the quality of everything in the next government, which I think is, I think that's a proper realistic ambition, and we should aim for it. And what would it take to bring that about? Well, I think it's a few things. The first is we've got to be really trusted. We've got to be, I think, really, we've got to be authoritative. If MP Watch says this person behaved in this way and it wasn't good enough, then that needs to be enough. People need to know that's enough, that we can't trust them either. And there's a principle in here, which is that if a politician really is public on a matter of policy, then that tells you a lot. It tells you, of course, that you can't trust them on that policy, but it also tells you they are fundamentally untrustworthy, and you can't trust them on anything at all that you care about. And it remains the case forever, unless you think they've had some unusual reformative experience, which is possible but rare. And it also tells you, and this is a really key point, it also tells you that you can't trust any of their colleagues who have stood by quietly in the knowledge that they are deceiving the public. And it's not just about straight lies, it's about all the other kind of forms of deception and misinformation that it's possible to deliberately put about. So if we can create that environment in which we're just very authoritative and we can point to, we don't have to catalog every single piece of misinformation that every politician does. You only need to find one really good example of one person where you can prove they were being deliberately deceitful, and that already rules that person right out, and anyone else who doesn't stand by them, who stands by them. Then that's going to be really important, and it means things like not being partisan, however tempting it might be, and it means being really clear about what we do and don't say. So we don't call something a lie unless it's actually definitely a provable lie, as in factually not true and provable that the person knows it's not true. But
Yes.
there are other forms of disinformation that we can use. So just need to be very careful with our language. And I also think it's going to be really important that we are, and this is tricky, especially when we're so angry about so many people, maybe, is that we be respectful of absolutely everybody, and we don't get involved in a kind of a spitting war. So even the MPs that we think are the most unhelpful, and I can list quite a few at the moment, we need to find, well, I think your phrase, Jessica, is pretty cool for this. When they go low, we go high, right? So we treat them with a respect that they're not treating other people with, but we model the kind of world that the kind of environment that we want to see. That's a really powerful way of undoing their approach, however difficult it might be to restrain ourselves. So there's a kind of discipline in MP Watch that I think is going to be really, really important.
Okay, so we have lots of questions actually that are beginning to appear in the chat, and we're happy to take them. So I believe most of the questions will be directed towards Mike, but if you also want to ask me or Tom questions about how MP Watch might take this on board, then we're also glad to answer those. So Tom, we could start the questions session. Please put your hand up. We'd love to see your faces, by the way, but that's not compulsory. But if you could use the reaction button to put your hand up, then we'll love to get you to ask your question in person. But in the meantime, Tom, do you want to read a couple of a question or two from the chat to get us going?
Yeah. So a question from Charlotte, which I think is very pertinent. Does Mike think that it's just a question of getting more honest representatives elected, or do we need a fundamental reboot of the way our democracy functions, adversarial, non-participatory, short-termism? And I would add to that the big elephant in the room. I used to think that we had a client press, but it's now apparent that we have a client government that's in hock to the press. And I think that the dishonesty that emerges from the press for their own gains is one of the big things. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I think that is absolutely right. And in a perfect world, we'd have a media watch as well as an MP watch. So it's true. We're, in a way, it would be fantastic if we could raise the bar on that at the same time, and the business world at the same time as well. And I'm trying to write a book about all those three things, because I think that you're right, they really do matter. But even without sorting out the media, I think we can do this with MP Watch, and I think also help the media as well. So and you're right, a fundamental reboot, and there's a whole lot that's wrong with how the system works, and it's adversarial, and and we've got first past the post election system, and we don't have things like, you know, citizens' assemblies and all that sort of stuff is really, really important. But if you want to put all that stuff in place, what's the best way of bringing it about? Well, let's begin by having some fundamental honesty going on. I actually think that is the route by which you stand the best chance of having the kind of discussions that bring it, that make it possible.
Brilliant. Let's have another question.
Here's one from Eileen. Does Mike have hope in Starmer's Labour? And someone else has asked, Pauline says, can we affect what candidates we have to choose from, though the main parties have already chosen?
Yeah, so this is tricky, isn't it? Because we do have a first past the post system, and I think you've got to be tactical in that situation. You have to vote for whoever stands a realistic chance. There's no, you have to play the game. And what do you do in a situation in which you might be facing a load of options, none of which feel anywhere near the quality that you'd like to see? And I think there's a really important principle here that we need to lay down, which is that even in that situation, just as much in that situation, you should vote for the least bad of the bunch that has a realistic chance, because there's no limit to how low things can go, right? So if you just wash your hands and say, oh well, they're all so bad, none of them are worth it, you'll end up with the worst one, and you deserve it if you do. But actually, even if in a situation you vote for somebody, we get somebody in who's just bad instead of very bad, that has helped. That is a better culture that you'll have in the House of Commons compared to if you let the very bad one in. So that's really important. Jessica, you got your hand up.
Yeah, and also we're going to be here for a while, so we will be putting the new MP, when they are new, as many of them will be after the next election, we're hoping, we will be putting them under pressure, and we will be reflecting back what we think their behavior is. So it will be fantastic if MPs not only feel the pressure from their parties, but feel pressure from their constituents, and go back to their parties and say, you're making me follow the whip, for example, but I've been hearing all week from my constituents, and they don't want me to do this. I'm in a terrible position. And the more we can do that and pressurize them, the more likely we are to move towards the politics that we all want. And the second, did that answer both questions? What about Starmer, Mike?
Starmer, yeah, okay. So this is the question. So I would love to see as much difference between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party as possible at the moment. And my big fear would be that they sink into the mire and become just as bad. At the moment, I think they're a long way from perfect, but I do think there's I actually think there's a very big difference between the two still at the moment. And I think we can do things now, and the sooner we get going and the sooner we start having the maximum kind of impact, the better. We can create the situation in which people in the run up to the election are knowing that if they play fast and loose with the truth, it will catch up with them, and it will hit them at the ballot box, and when they get in, if they get in, they will know that if we can create the environment in which it's really clear that some politicians got badly caught out on this one and it ended their career as a politician, then we can create an environment in the next parliament in which nobody can do that, because they know their careers depend on them not doing it.
And can I also mention the Brown report, which part of which was focused on standards, and Angela Rayner has taken some of that on board. And I think that one of the things that we need to be doing for those of you with Labour MPs or Labour candidates that you are talking to is saying that you very much want that to be implemented as soon as possible and as as effectively as possible. Do we have any more questions? Does nobody want to ask their question in person? It'd be much more fun if you did.
Well, we do have some more in the chat. Tanya says, have you considered joining forces somehow with They Work For You? And Val talks about Greenpeace's new initiative to analyze all manifestos and recruit a million climate voters. We have actually been in communication with both, and those two, amongst others, are feeding into our mega database of a one-stop shop to see how MPs don't just vote on climate, which I think was obviously the thrust of the Greenpeace thing, but just our one-stop shop scrapes every influence on MPs, whether it's the building industry or so we're trying to feed all of those. We're talking to all of those people to try and feed that into our big mothership of a resource. And
can I just mention the My Society They Vote For You? They also are doing a rather fantastic thing, which is focused on councils, where you can see how effective your council is being on carbon net zero. So, but their data scraping thing isn't really a group of people, it's a system that they've set up. But we are talking to My Society right now. And it looks like Simon Honey is going to ask a question direct.
Sorry, I was wriggling around with excitement so much that it may have been mentioned. What do you think of Vote Climate UK? Because it's talking about exactly what you're talking about, I think, Mike. The fact that they'll tell you the most realistic candidate to vote for the best action on climate. Have you come across them?
Yeah, I have come across them. I haven't followed them in detail. Jessica and Tom might have done more so. My thought about this is that most of the time they will line up with each other pretty nicely. But there will also be some people who are saying the right things on climate or sound like they are, but actually they can't be trusted an inch.
Yeah.
And we will also, we will perhaps do a better job at flushing them out.
So Ben is part of, if you're part of the WhatsApp, the national WhatsApp team, Ben from Vote Climate is on there. We had a slightly tricky moment when somebody didn't realize they were on and they were like, bloody hell, Caroline Lucas is very low in the ratings or something. And I was a bit like, oh, Ben's going to be hearing the undiluted kind of version of this. But he's a very helpful person, very much on our side. So you can interact with him directly. We're liaising with him. He does have a kind of plan, as you say, Simon, about how to deal with the election, but he isn't building groups like we are, and so it will be quite hard for him just with a social media campaign to implement that. But I think what he's doing is incredibly helpful in framing our project and how we're thinking. So I would very much recommend that people have a look at the Vote Climate website. Yeah.
So one of the jobs is to map out, and we've sort of talked about this, and I think we've sort of half got a project going to do this, is to map out all the stuff that's vaguely in our space and see how we can best make sure we collaborate with it all. Because some of the kind of research on who's saying what and who can be trusted and why and all the rest of it, we can join forces on for sure.
Brilliant. Any more brave folk who want to voice their own questions? Tony Graham is smiling a lot.
There you go. Okay, I'll voice my own question. I've heard a few questions in there, Mike, in the chat. I guess the most relevant one here is, we saw the glitter bomb by Yaz of Starmer. How do you feel that he and many of us just observe that political change just is no longer happening fast enough for the rate, you know, for climate change and the rate that is starting to kick off?
Well, I mean, I would completely agree with that. And so everybody's kind of scratching their head going, you know, what's the theory of change here? And Just Stop Oil have, you know, decided, you know, they've got their, and, you know, and other kind of forms of sort of more disruptive process of, you know, have got their theory of change. And we can have long debates about whether that's right or wrong. And I don't think anybody really knows the answer to that. But whether that stuff is right or wrong, or helpful or unhelpful, I think there is, you know, if we want rapid change, I think this is a route by which we could have it. I think, you know, with a following wind, if we get everything right, we really could change the dial on this in a way that changes the landscape and very quickly makes it much more possible to get much higher quality decision making, you know, and actually honesty on all this stuff would make it dramatically easier for the public to understand properly what's going on as well, because you couldn't get away with misinformation. You know, one event like Grant Shapps, for example, saying we need new oil and gas because otherwise our energy prices will go through the roof, right? He knows that's not true. And we can prove that he knows that's not true. And actually, that's all you need to know about Grant Shapps to know that he's completely unfit to be an MP ever, right? So, you know, if we can change the dial in which enough people get that message, then it means that nobody like Grant Shapps can go anywhere, or even if they do find themselves in Parliament, they can't behave like that, then that would be transformative.
Leslie, you've written something. Would you? Oh, Julian's got his hand up, so I'll go there first.
Yeah, I did send in a question. I only just turned up late to the meeting, yeah, so I don't know whether it's been raised or not. I sent it in earlier, yeah. I've just been trying to push this. I've done lots of work with XR, help run their digital XR Digital Rebellion. I'm also affiliated with Greenpeace, but that's working from the outside, yeah? My approach is basically, we got to, in the army, yeah, you attack a bridge from both ends, yeah? Not one. Marketing, you have a push and a pull policy, yeah?
Yeah.
Likewise, we should take the approach that we protest from outside, yeah, fine, good. But when we send in these emails, yeah, you got to understand that the average MP has 20,000 pieces of mail, yeah? They've got a very effective filtering system. So all those just get sidelined and you get the standard stop, you know, rebuttal, yeah? So we've been doing that for ages, yeah? Again, what you got to do, adapt and overcome, yeah? So they've got used to that. So one of our major competitive advantage over the fossil fuel and other lobbying bodies which basically corrupt the political process is for us is we got the vote and we can become members of parties, yeah? Now, I've joined the Labour Party, yeah? It's in my area. They've got a green policy, yeah, which is credible. They're going to be the next government. So the more of us join the party, yeah, the more we can influence it. Within our little local party, we've set up our own little group, and it's early days, but if we can start working from the inside as well as the out, that way we can hold our MPs to account. While XR were basically protesting on Parliament Green, yeah, I was actually having face-to-face with my MP saying, look, why aren't you coming out and seeing us and what have you? So we're really missing a trick. You know, these mailing exercises, we're just fooling ourselves. We got to start really having some effect on the political system, and you don't do it. It's partly by protesting from outside, but we really got to start getting guys on the inside there.
Okay, so Jessica, I think we both want to answer that one. You go.
You
first.
you answer, Mike.
Yeah.
And,
okay. So first of all, MP Watch is about far more than just emailing people. So, you know, I don't want to sort of I don't want to just preempt exactly how things might go. But for example, one possibility might be that, you know, when people put placards up in their gardens for vote for this party or vote for that party, and in their window and all the rest of it, well, there might be some placards that just say vote for somebody honest, and this is how to find out who, and this is why it matters, or I don't know what. So it's something that you absolutely can't ignore, because the candidates know that their voters are being confronted with this perspective that honesty matters. You can find out who's more on. So it's absolutely a lot more impactful than that. And in terms of the kind of, you know, different approaches, attack the bridge from two ends at once, I think that's absolutely right. And in fact, how I first met Jessica and Tom was at a gathering that Rupert Reed convened that was that he was calling the moderate flank, to try and work out what the moderate flank was. And the idea was that if Just Stop Oil and Insulate Britain and so on were the extreme flank, then we were the kind of moderate radical flank. I don't know quite how it works, but it was exactly that concept of two approaches.
Yes, and I would invite Gemma, if she's still there. I know she's got kids, and she also works for the NHS, so she might be okay. Well, Gemma is part of Baker Watch, Steve Baker Watch, which is one of our first groups. And the thing is, it isn't about the occasional email. It is about reflecting back to your MP, holding up a mirror to them. So if they do something good, you give them credit. If they do something you don't like, you call attention to it. And Gemma's group have letters in the local paper week in and week out. Steve Baker is very, very aware of what they're doing. He's called them clowns. He called them Muppets this week. But he came back and he said, "What's your data protection rules? Have you talked to the Electoral Commission? Have you declared tax on donations that you've received?" He's quite spooked by them. We're under his skin. He's a big climate denier, so we would prefer him to go at the next election, and he's very clear about that. And what's more, it looks like he is destined to leave the political stage. So it's not about the occasional email. It's about kind of bedding down and being a mirror, and also really giving them credit if they do anything, you know, if they do anything positive, so that we're building a model of good practice, as well as, you know, we're not attack dogs. We want a probity and integrity in our public life. Probity, please don't say that in your local press, but, you know, we want an honesty of approach, and it's by reflecting it back that we will have an effect. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Tom? Because you've been part of Baker Watch as long as me.
Just two things. Yes, it is being a constant presence, not just doing things occasionally and then being forgotten about. It is Baker Watch has a vigil outside his constituency office, which gets more and more car honking at them in support every single Friday. He cannot forget that he is being scrutinized, and the other thing is that the fact that the name MP Watch is getting bigger and bigger means that it is not just a constituency looking at their MP, which all the other MPs can think, oh, bad luck, Steve, he's got those clowns. If we become bigger and bigger and more noticeable by the day, then they know that this is a movement. We are people that are able to scrutinize them constantly, and we have the resources to do it. And they may not change their minds, but they might think pragmatically that, well, I won't be elected if I'm seen to be continuing to lie. And I know my lies are obvious. They know their lies are obvious, but just the idea of lying in plain sight becomes a thing of the past.
Yeah, that's great. The reason I was giggling is that Lisa Johnson has written, I'm going to need a lot of mirrors for McVeigh watch. You probably are. Esther McVeigh is a climate denier. Yes. Any more questions? Any from the pool, Tom, that you can see? How about Leslie? You had a comment, I think, rather than the question.
Yeah, I had a comment in response to some other people's comments. So I'd like to point out that it's sometimes there's a tension between talking from the inside or shouting from the outside, and actually both are really important. So like today, a number of us really disrupted a conference of oil intelligence, and that was the only pressure we were able to exert. If you join a political party, you might be able to influence it, or you might not. And it's really important that, you know, even if your local party and maybe your local MP is fairly honest and fairly climate aware, that they're still under a whipping system and they're still subject to lobbying. And any pressure that we can put on both is going to help them withstand the pressure from the lobbyists, and kind of counterbalance that pressure to be corrupt. And the thing I put in the comment was about corporate state capture, which I'm not sure if it's a term that people use or are familiar with or are offended by. But it's the notion that, you know, that corporate influence is so powerful. And is it something that we're considering and trying to counterbalance, or is it kind of in the too difficult box, or some kind of another conspiracy theory?
Do you want to take that, Mike?
Yeah, well, so we've knocked up, for the moment, we've got sort of 5 criteria by which to have a look at an MP. And one of them is about the transparency of their funding and their influences. So are they straight about who's lobbying them and who they're having dinner with? And are they straight about where their money's coming from personally and politically? And the second criteria is, after they've been transparent about it all, the extent to which the funding that they get and the people they're spending time with and who are lobbying them leave them free to make decisions in the public interest, or the extent to which they've corroded that ability. So so in a way, that's a route to starting to hold the big corporate interests at bay.
Yeah. Actually, something just occurred to me. We've run over the hour. I'm proposed to go along until, I should have said at the beginning, sorry, bad facilitation, that I think we should end at 8:15, partly because of the slightly staggered beginning that we had, is because of the technical problems. But one thing that I think is important to say is that some of you have been with us for a while. I can see Hugo on the call, for example. He started our second campaign in Whitney. And so at that point, we were focusing on climate. And we don't feel that we've taken a change of direction with this. We feel that it's a sort of broadening. And I think groups who are in that position, we would ask you to look at 3 questions and maybe include it in on your social media site or your website. And it's something like, has your MP ever lied on the public record? And if they have, you can say that till the cows come home and no one can get you for defamation, because it's a matter of the public record. Has your MP ever supported a minister or their party in a lie on the public record? And thirdly, has your MP, to do the counterbalance, ever done something courageous to support truth or to distance themselves from dishonesty? And if you, in your website and in your communications, if you can include something of that, they will require little research, but it's not mind-blowing, I hope, then I think that you have widened what you're doing to include this focus. But we will be updating you, as well as on climate matters, but also on matters of transparency and on standards in public life, so that in your social media and in your local campaigns that you are armed. Military metaphors always come forward, don't they, at this stage? But you are enabled with this information to also look at these questions.
Graham in the chat has asked, can you tell us more about the coordinated approach?
Do you mean to the election campaign, Graham?
Any coordination would be helpful. It's just about having a lot of motivation, but not much information and in-depth sort of background knowledge. Having some ammunition, basically.
Okay, well, do you mean for when you meet the MP, or do you mean for your ongoing work and approach? Mostly
for the ongoing work. I don't think I'm going to meet my MP.
Okay, well, so Graham, we're very pleased to have him on a recent training. I think you finished just a week or so ago, is that right?
No, I was on the first one.
Oh, on the first one, brilliant. So are you part of the MP Watch WhatsApp chat?
Yes.
Great. So one of the supports that we give is that we have a political researcher called Victor, and he recently put in the chat, but there is also in this Slack a document which shows what's going on in Parliament at the moment. So you can see what your MP is doing in Parliament, and the it's been party season, but they are going back at the beginning of November. So that's one way that we help. And any votes that come up that are to do with environment or standards in public life will be flagged up. And then it may be Tom and it may be that another researcher will find the votes the next day of the MPs on our list, so that you will know how your MP voted. Most probably they're going to have followed the party whip, but you can then through your social media draw attention to how they voted and whether you agree with it or not. So that's one of the supports that we give.
One of the resources that we have rolled out to help people talk to their MPs and be prepared for the usual rebuttals that MPs give, the sort of obfuscation and misinformation that they just roll out from central office. So just being prepared with the facts, but we thought we ought to keep MPs in the loop with the facts, just in case they don't know the facts and they're just parroting central office because they don't know any better. So I've been preparing a document that can be presented to MPs in a collegial sort of way, just to say, you may not be aware of these facts, but here they are. So next time you get something that is shows some ignorance from central office, you might rebut it at that end.
It feels like we're running out of questions. Hugo has one. Welcome, Hugo. Nice to see you.
Hi. It's a quick one, I hope. And if you haven't particularly heard of them, then we'll just drop it rather than talk about it. Have you anything to say about the South Devon Primary Initiative? Because we've been approached at Robert Court's Watch, and we've actually decided that we can't really play ball with them for various reasons.
I love Simon Aldridge.
Oh, I love
behind
Simon
it. He's an amazing man.
I agree with that.
I'll let Mike answer about his approach, and then we can give the MP Watch. But I mean, Simon Aldridge has an MP Watch group. He's concentrating on the Devon primary, but he also does have an Anthony Mangle watch going on. Mike, do you know
so
about
my
this?
thought, I know about this. So my thought about this is that it's complementary to MP Watch. It doesn't, the two enforce each other, you know, so it's great to have them both going on. They don't undermine each other or water each other down in any way at all. I think that's fantastic. And it feels like, you know, it's a really good thing to do in some constituencies. It's one attempt to try and mitigate the inadequacies of first past the post. You know, so I think it's great. I think it's an additional thing. And, you know, come the day when we get a better quality of MP and a better quality of decision making, first past the post will be gone, and that will radically change things.
Yes. Anne, you have a question as well. And Stuart?
Sorry, I was on mute. I have been hesitating because this isn't particularly about British politics and our local politicians. It's more about what you were saying earlier about the COP. I mean, this year COP is basically being run by the oil industry, as far as I'm concerned, which they've basically taken it over. I wondered if Mike could comment on that, if there's any point to it at all.
Well, I think the COPs, I'm not saying we shouldn't have COPs, but I think, you know, we've had 27 of them and not the faintest dent in that carbon curve at all. And my take on it is that, you know, broadly speaking, at the moment, the fossil fuel industry will allow the policymakers to say and do more or less anything they like on climate, as long as it won't succeed in reducing the rate at which they take fossil fuel out of the ground and sell it. So it's a total stranglehold. So I think it's as clear as daylight that the COPs, although we shouldn't probably stop having them, they're just absolutely inadequate on their own. What would it take for the COPs to be working? Well, it would take everybody who goes to the COP representing a country to know that back home, all their voters are absolutely screaming for them to push like mad for the right thing. So I think, you know, if the mechanism by which we get something like, you know, a carbon price, which to me is totally essential, you know, would ever come about and the COPs would ever contribute to that, you know, it would come about through a change in environment in the constituent countries that enabled the COP to have a bit more teeth, I think.
Thanks.
Can I just say that Susie had her hand up a while back. I don't know whether you still want to come in.
Yes, I'm so sorry, Susie.
I saw that we were coming up to closing. I saw that we were coming up to closing time, so I put it down again. But it's just this question I put in the chat: who is the we here? And we do tread into that very muddy ground of being very undemocratic because the educated middle class want to see a change, and yes, not there because it's a huge question, and I'm not politically educated. What am I saying?
All right, so I'll give the first go at the answer. You might want to chip in behind it, Jessica or Tom as well. But I think this is one of the things about widening it to honesty and not just climate, is that there are lots of different kinds of people who are screaming about the nasty things that are happening in their lives, things that they care about, that they're just you know, and they've all got dishonesty at the core as well. So I think it's by taking the approach on honesty that we tap into all of that.
Yes. We also think we haven't yet devised our approach to the political strategy and the election. But I think that we will definitely be getting, we'll be asking those of you with the bandwidth and the groups to analyze your constituencies and work out, you know, their compositions. And in Baker Watch, we have done some door knocking. And I think there is something very moving about somebody knocking on your door and saying, I'm your neighbor up the road, and I'm really concerned about this election and about the crises and political honesty. How do you feel? And I don't know about you, but even when Jehovah's Witnesses, who are never welcome at my door, I always say I'm a Buddhist, meaning please go away. I always feel quite moved that they have, you know, that they are spending their time reaching out to people. And if you don't have a brand, if you don't have a political rosette, or you don't have some of you may be Christian, so forgive me, but you know, if you don't have a brand like that people are expecting, I think it makes them think a little bit more. So that is one approach that we can take, but we definitely have to think about our communities and how we can best get in there and help. And sometimes it might be going to where they are and helping them out and spending time in order to win some trust and show that you are a bona fide member of the constituency and interested in community. But if you're interested in working on this, we, like most of the climate movement anyway, have got lots of work to do on this, and we're aware of it. So, you know, let's try and get something going on that. So it is now 19 minutes past, so I've lied and we're 4 minutes over, but I'd really like, if you don't mind, those of you still on the call, would you put on your videos, and let's thank Mike for his time in whatever way you want. I'm going to wiggle my hands in a kind of XRE sort of way. Thank you, Mike, for your time.
Well, look, thank you, everybody, and Jessica and Tom especially, but everybody, for getting MP Watch off the ground. I mean, I think it's a really, really exciting thing. Yes,
thank you. And you know, keep in touch with us. Join the MP Watch chat. Do get in touch with Marine, who sadly couldn't be here because she's wonderful. And hope to meet some of you next week on the social media webinar. Go well.